Death Note has multiple adaptations throughout media ranging from anime, manga, novels, and even live action. Every adaptation has a different take on Light as a character. But which version of Light is the best? We're going to be going over different Death Note material to figure that out. So without further ado, let's get into the video, starting off with Anime Light. Anime Light's introduction is far more different than his manga counterparts. There's a lot of focus on his eyes, and before he picks up the Death Note, he looks absolutely dead inside. At the same time, his eyes also sort of have a dormant look, as if he needs something to activate them and bring the life back in his eyes. Or light in his eyes, haha. Which we all know is the Death Note, or not having boredom anymore. What's interesting is that we don't get a single bit of dialogue from Light until he leaves class, because all he ends up doing is giving his classmates the serious side eye. Everyone is talking about their own sort of priorities, whether it be breaking up with boyfriends or playing the Nintendo DS. Light clearly detests the people around him based on his facial reaction, as he finds their interests and priorities to be simple-minded or flat out dumb. This highlights the disconnect between Light and his peers, indicating that he's unable to relate to others. The anime even goes as far as to tease Light's eventual god complex by having Light's teacher make him read an excerpt from the Bible. But what's interesting is that for a kid who's so smart, he really hates showing it in front of others. Whenever Light gets called upon by the teacher, he immediately rolls his eyes and sighs, almost as if being tasked with reading a scripture is some mundane task. After class ends, Light immediately makes his way home and doesn't walk with anyone. He's walking in solitude, but still has an apathetic look in his eyes. Even though Light gets the notebook and his boredom is alleviated, he still isolates himself from others, whether it be during lunch, after classes, or even during gym class. He makes sure to keep his distance, only doing what's necessary. It's not as if Light is unpopular or unreachable in any way. He actually gets approached by his classmates in episode 2, but straight up dubs them as he claims he's busy. Ryuk even corrects Light by saying he doesn't really have anything to do aside from writing in the notebook, to which Light gives a whole big speech about how he needs to maintain his grades because he can't fall behind in school. But what's concerning about Anime Light is how intrigued he is with the notebook. He flips through its rules and regulations and immediately turns the TV on to pick his first victim. He waits for a bit of time after writing his name down, but nobody dies. He actually is disappointed. It's almost as like he wanted the criminal to die. And when it does happen, he is shocked and feels the need to test out the notebook again. Now, a massive change occurs in the anime regarding Light's second victim, Takeshi Shibimaru. He harasses a woman on the street and immediately gets his friends to corner and jump her. As she's about to be assaulted, Light is literally just watching through the convenience store window. Now, I know what you're thinking. It's fine, he planned to kill him with the Death Note, so problem solved. Except this isn't fine, and at this point Light had no idea if the notebook was legit or not. Assuming it doesn't work, what was he going to do next? Would he just watch an innocent girl get assaulted, or would he actually step in? We'll never know because luckily the Death Note did work. But it's also unlucky for Light because he knows with absolute certainty that he's a murderer. Now, most people would immediately discard the notebook and be racked with guilt. But Light is quite literally built different. He's obviously shocked by what happened, but rather than throw away the notebook, he questions if he has the right to judge people, if he has been chosen. It's once again pretty concerning how Light frames murder as judgment, but at the same time it does make sense. He's always kept himself at a distance from those he perceives as being beneath him, and very clearly feels superior to most people. Judgment is what he does, day in and day out, at least in his head. To many people, and Light himself, what he did was correct from a moral standpoint. It's also much easier to forgive yourself for committing such a harsh crime if the person you killed was about to have non-consensual relations with a woman. Like his manga counterpart, he also paints himself as a martyr to ease him into his new role in the world. What's also interesting for Anime Light is that he transitions into his role as Kira with far more ease than his manga counterpart. He doesn't seem to be stressed and takes literal pride and enjoyment out of the fact that he possesses such a power. His eyes are no longer dull, and they are now vibrant and red, which signifies the birth of Kira. To sum it up, Anime Light was already broken before he picked up the notebook. He was very depressed and felt like he had no sense of self or purpose. The notebook is what turned the shards into a mirror. But it wasn't until his last moments that he realized the glass fragments that stitched back into a mirror were faulty from the start. The Death Note was never meant to be wielded by Light, and to put it bluntly, his life would have been way better if he had never picked it up. It enabled the worst pre-existing qualities in Light, which would have always remained dormant if he stuck to his studies and academics instead of becoming a serial killer. Also, while this I do find Anime Light to be far more concerning and less empathetic than his manga counterpart, I don't believe he's a sociopath like most people label him as. He does indeed possess sociopathic tendencies, but he's far from one. Sociopaths have very specific neurocognitive differences in both the frontal and medial temporal lobes of the brain that cause an impaired capacity for long-term planning and an absent capacity for certain emotions such as empathy, fear, and guilt. Anime Light isn't the most empathetic person out there, but he is not completely incapable of feeling guilt, fear, or even sadness. He literally cried for his father when he died, was at first terrified after he found the death note, and though he did his best to hide it, felt immense guilt for the destruction that the notebook brought on his family life. So in summary, Anime Light is just a tad bit more detached than his manga self, but with all this talk about Manga Light, what is he really like? Now be prepared to be shocked because Manga Light is completely different compared to his anime counterpart. At the start, rather than silently judging his classmates for being incompetent, Manga Light just doesn't really care. He's aware of the people around him, but he's just too bored and depressed to give a damn. You'd think that someone who thinks so differently and is so trapped in his own mind would be a loner of sorts, but you're actually wrong. Manga Light is very popular, and unlike his anime counterpart, actually walks home with classmates and talks about usual teenage stuff. We then get another difference between anime and Manga Light, and it revolves around their intelligence. Manga Light isn't afraid to show off his knowledge and intellect in front of friends and other people, and if anything, he clearly likes the attention. His friends are clearly impressed with his brilliance, which feeds into his ego and narcissistic tendencies even more. It gives Light minor amusement as he likes to be put on a pedestal. He's a shooting star that shines brighter than most, and he's perfectly content with being admired. Now, what about the handling of the Death Note? Well, like Anime Light, Manga Light picks it up and is intrigued by it. Once again, another difference between anime and Manga Light is their thoughts. Manga Light is clearly into dark humor, but keeps this to himself and his own thoughts. He doesn't share his twisted jokes with his classmates, as he obviously doesn't want to be shunned for it. He's always wearing a mask and keeps it on tightly, whereas Anime Light just doesn't care enough to socialize with anyone and barely makes an attempt to hide his disinterest. Light still tests his notebook out on the killer that holds a nursery hostage, and then goes to cram school to test it out once more. We then get the same scene of Takue Shibimaru harassing the woman, except it's far less violent than the anime's betrayal. I believe this was done in order to further justify Light using the notebook, and perhaps portray him in a good light, no pun intended. But all it really did was kind of backfire. Anyway, Manga Light at least acknowledges the bikers rather than straight up ignore them, and he retreats to a convenience store to write his name down. It works, and Light is in complete disbelief. He immediately flees the scene of the crime and has an absolutely sick look on his face, and begins to lament over his actions. To cope with the guilt, he attempts to justify his actions, but even he isn't foolish enough to gaslight himself into believing that killing the biker was justified. In Light's eyes, he didn't deserve to die, which is what led him to rationalize his actions by reminding himself of how rotten the world is. He states that someone has to clean it up, but he immediately goes back to being fearful and wonders if he has the guts to do it. Once again, he makes himself out to be a martyr by stating he's the only person capable of ridding the world of all criminals, or more specifically, the only one who can change the world. However, Light is still readjusting to his new role. He tells Ryuk that he's not only having nightmares, but hasn't slept for over 5 days, and he's even lost over 10 pounds. Even before meeting Ryuk, he looks incredibly stressed to be possessing the notebook, as he takes some time to catch his breath after returning home. Even when he holds the notebook, he isn't smiling like his anime counterpart. He's still coming to terms with the fact that he's a murderer who possesses a supernatural notebook that can kill any human. He doesn't even take pride in the fact that he's killed countless criminals. He's completely on edge and slowly losing his sanity. Manga Light has not managed to reconcile his actions and beliefs at this point. There is a genuine conflict here between what he knows is right and what he has convinced himself that he must do for the betterment of society. He takes no pleasure in needing to be the martyr. It's a burden and a responsibility that he has to carry out at the expense of his own health. In other words, it's nothing to laugh about. Unlike his anime counterpart who immediately hits the Kira laugh after he reviews all the names he's written down. It's clear that Manga Light struggled far more than Anime Light when it came to morality and guilt, which makes his evolution that much more interesting. With Anime Light, there was far less pushback and resistance compared to his manga counterpart, who quite literally snapped at the cost of becoming Kira. Overall, Manga Light is easily the most empathetic version of Light out there, and his descent into madness is masterfully done. This is shown via the art style change, as before the Death Note, he has the look of an innocent and soft-spoken boy who genuinely had good intentions. intentions, but towards the end of the manga he has the same face as the criminal scum he's trying to rid the world of. He's become a man who has confused himself with a god, and in Nier's own words, he's nothing more than a crazy serial killer who wants to force his own will onto the world. There is one more version of Light, and he stems from the Japanese live-action movies that came out in 2006. There's honestly not too much to say about movie Light aside from minor differences. He doesn't start off as a teenager, and by the time he gets the notebook, he's a first-year college student studying law. Like his anime and manga counterparts, he's very frustrated about the current state of the world, which further motivates him to use the Death Note. He doesn't struggle with morality like his anime and manga selves do, and even goes as far as to kill his own girlfriend, Shiori Akino, to cover up his own crimes. He even plots to kill his own father after he has Rem kill L and Watari. Despite his ruefulness, he does have a certain level of empathy, as he did feel guilty for killing Shiori. But at the same time, he put his own interests above her own life. He also cared about Shutaro and was very reluctant to write his name in the Death Note. Like his anime and manga selves, he does die eventually, but his death is handled very sympathetically. Before he dies, he tells his father why he picks up the notebook, as he states he wanted to make him proud and reduce crime, before he uses his dying words to beg his father to understand him. But with all that being said, who is the best version of Light? Well, it's undeniably Manga Light. He's very well written and is given much more depth than his anime counterpart, which actually cuts out a decent bit of original source material. This damages Light's character and causes people to confuse him for some sort of sociopath or psychopathic monster, when in actuality he's far from either. But again, it is easy to mistake him for such due to an alarming lack of empathy. Manga Light, however, has a more realistic portrayal of one's descent into madness. Movie Light would be last since there isn't much to work with, but in a way, he is far more brutal than his anime and manga selves, as he was actually willing to kill his own father. Even if he was hesitant, he still planned it out, which is something that neither of the aforementioned Lights would do. But which version of Light is your favorite? Be sure to comment down below, and of course, thank you so much for watching.